All right, let's dive right into this explainer. If you've been watching the global markets even a little bit lately, you know all about the real-world pain of the weak yen. We are talking skyrocketing import costs and massive margin squeezes practically across the board. It's a very real, very pressing issue. So today, we're unpacking a really fascinating, highly competitive debate transcript from a platform called Poligio. It tackles the absolute core economic dilemma at the heart of all this. Should the government step in to stop the bleeding?
So is foreign exchange intervention actually justified? That is the central question of the rigorous intellectual duel we're analyzing today. And you know, this isn't just some abstract academic policy discussion. It is a profound clash of ideologies. On one side, you have the argument for state intervention, which relies on the belief that a government simply must protect its people. On the flip side, you have the defense of free market forces and sticking to long-term economic fundamentals. As this debate makes incredibly clear, this single question touches on everything from everyday wages to corporate competitiveness to literally the future of the nation's entire economy.
Here is how we're going to break this all down today. First up, the weak yen dilemma. Then, we'll examine the arguments for and against intervention, explore the core conflict, and finally, reveal the official verdict.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the weak yen dilemma, taking a quick look at the context and the underlying stakes.
The weak yen presents what is basically a brutal macroeconomic double-edged sword. On the bad side, you have the drastic inflation of imported energy and raw materials. That absolutely crushes domestic-facing businesses and eats right into real wages for everyday people. But then, look over at the good column. Export-heavy megacorporations are pulling in record profits, and there's a massive inbound tourism boom happening simultaneously. It is a textbook, real-time case of concentrated benefits and widely distributed pain.
Moving right along to Section 2, arguing for intervention. This is the affirmative case.
So the affirmative side builds their case on three really powerful pillars. First is urgency. Sudden, drastic currency drops, we're talking incredibly volatile shifts of 20 to 30 yen in just a matter of months, destroy the ability of businesses to plan ahead, and they directly harm citizens through rapid, uncontrollable inflation. Second, they argue this whole situation isn't just reflecting natural economic fundamentals, it's being artificially exaggerated by short-term market speculators just looking to make a quick buck. And finally, they framed government intervention not as some permanent magical fix, but as a crucial emergency safety valve. The state simply has to step in and signal to speculators that excessive, disorderly market chaos will not be tolerated.
There's this one quote from the transcript that really hits the nail on the head when it comes to the affirmative's moral stance. Currency is the nation's blood. Their entire argument is deeply rooted in this idea that if the rapid fluctuation of currency is causing direct, tangible harm to the livelihoods of regular citizens, the government has an absolute, undeniable responsibility to step in. To them, protecting people has to take precedence over any strict, textbook adherence to free market principles.
All right, switching gears to Section 3, arguing against intervention or the negative case. Now their tone is totally different. It's strictly analytical, heavily favoring long-term economic logic over short-term relief.
The negative's core argument is pretty straightforward. You simply cannot fight the fundamental tide of global economics with temporary currency buys. Let's be real. Trying to outmuscle the multi-trillion-dollar foreign exchange market is literally like trying to hold back the ocean with a broom. They point out that the actual root cause of the weak yen is the massive interest rate gap between high U.S. rates and ultra-low Japanese rates. As long as that gap is there, investment money is naturally going to flow toward the dollar. Furthermore, they argue that relying on this kind of temporary painkiller distracts the entire nation from doing the really difficult, painful, but ultimately necessary structural reforms required to fix the actual foundation, things like boosting overall productivity. And they point out a glaring policy contradiction with this great line. It's like stepping on the gas and the brake at the same time. Because think about it, the central bank maintains ultra-low interest rates, which actively fuels the weak yen, while the government simultaneously intervenes in the market to try and stop it. They argue that this kind of contradictory stance entirely destroys the market's trust in the government's long-term financial credibility.
That brings us to Section 4, the core conflict, where these clashing ideologies go head-to-head. Let's act as a neutral referee here and look at the actual cross-examination from the debate.
The whole debate essentially boils down to this ultimate face-off. On one side, the affirmative is fighting tooth and nail for short-term shock absorption. They totally acknowledge that intervention doesn't solve the root cause, but they argue that buying time is a perfectly valid and desperately needed policy to keep local businesses from going bankrupt today. But on the other side, the negative is fighting for long-term policy consistency. They counter that temporary fixes just burn through immense amounts of public funds, merely delay the inevitable, and ultimately just weaken the country's economic standing.
During the cross-examination, things got really interesting. The negative side dropped this incredibly probing question. If the ultimate goal is just to protect citizens from high prices, why on earth use massive amounts of public funds to try and wrestle with the unstoppable, multi-trillion-dollar global foreign exchange market? Wouldn't it be vastly more efficient to just take those exact same funds and give direct subsidies and energy assistance directly to the low-income households and small businesses that actually need the help?
But how did the affirmative counter? Well, they basically argued that direct subsidies are only treating the symptoms, the result of the problem. If you only hand out subsidies while the currency continues to completely plummet, the government is just going to be stuck paying out those subsidies forever. They argue that intervention actually targets the immediate cause of the sudden drop, which is that out-of-control speculative momentum. So in their view, these policies aren't an either-or situation, they absolutely need to be combined.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the final verdict. Logic over emotion. Both sides presented incredibly compelling, fact-checked cases. But in a competitive format like this, there can only be one winner.
Looking right at the official judges' feedback from the transcript, they heavily praised the exceptionally high caliber of this debate. They fully acknowledged the affirmative's powerful, empathetic argument regarding the real-world pain people are feeling right now. But they also noted that competitive debates ultimately hinge on strict logical consistency.
And the final verdict? It goes to the negative side, those arguing strictly against foreign exchange intervention. The judges decided that while the affirmative's moral defense of the citizens was incredibly strong, the negative side just constructed a much more undeniable, logically sound framework that was actually based on long-term sustainability. The judges broke their decision down into three main reasons. First, the harsh reality that intervention really only yields very temporary results against overwhelming global market trends. Second, the undeniable fact that the fundamental issue, that massive US-Japan interest rate gap, cannot be magically fixed just by buying up currency. And third, they highly praised the negative side for not just being stubborn market fundamentalists, but for actually providing a practical, data-backed alternative. The negative proved that targeted, direct aid to citizens is a vastly more efficient use of taxpayer resources than attempting to artificially manipulate a global exchange market. The affirmative, the judges noted, ultimately just couldn't provide clear criteria for exactly when and at what specific level intervention is genuinely justified.
And honestly, that perfectly illustrates the core takeaway of this whole explainer. Complex macroeconomic issues rarely, if ever, have simple black-and-white solutions. It requires balancing the very real, immediate pain of everyday citizens against the cold, hard logic of long-term economic stability. The source material challenges us to put aside our emotional reactions and apply rigorous, logical thinking. So, having heard the best evidence from both sides today, I'm going to leave you with this. Where do you stand? In the face of a rapidly depreciating currency, are you affirmative, demanding immediate intervention to stop the bleeding today? Or are you negative, trusting the incredibly difficult path of structural reform and targeted aid over market manipulation? It is definitely a question worth pondering. Until next time, keep analyzing the facts.